African countries are ready to take on the emerging digital markets across the continent. Africa heads of competition dialogue have committed to expanding dialogue on how digital markets impact the local and global economy. Regulators from Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, Nigeria, and South Africa have met to discuss the challenges that emerging digital markets pose. They noted that policymakers and competition authorities in leading economies across the world are reviewing their approach to regulation and enforcement of digital markets. They agreed to research barriers to emerging and expanding African digital platforms and sharing information on existing laws and protocols, among others. The regulators signed a memorandum of understanding in Johannesburg to work together under the Africa Heads of Competition Dialogue to address emerging digital market challenges. In a statement, the group said digital markets and services have transformed how traditional markets function, raising unique competition issues that necessitates collaboration in re-evaluating the approach to regulations in the markets. Africa's rapid adoption of advanced technology has allowed it to leapfrog in its economic growth. As a result, some entrepreneurs are forgoing brick-and-mortar shops for digital storefronts. Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa have seen rapid growth in domestic e-commerce businesses in the past 10 years as internet access expands. What potential does the digital market hold for Africa? Today, we're looking at Africa launching a regulator for emerging digital markets. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adelaru Balogun. And joining me on today's show is Gospel Obele. He's the chief economist for Streetonomics and, of course, a member and a friend of Business Edge. Gospel, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tolu. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's start this conversation with an understanding of what digital markets are so that everyone is on the same page. It's very easy to say digital marketplaces, e-commerce, but for the purposes of this conversation and the conversation that heads of competition from across the continent had, what exactly is the digital markets?
Right, thank you. So I'll just use a very simple scenario, all right? 20 years ago, let's say 30 years ago, an individual will probably have to go to a market, a traditional market, maybe like a Koidumota right now, to buy clothes, buy fabric and all of that. But right now, you can sit in the comfort of your home, open a Jumia or a Konga or a Gigi or somewhere online, even on Instagram, all right? And then order for your fabrics. And then you pay online and you get them delivered to you at your doorstep. So that's just simply what it means, all right? You're just taking the same process of buying and selling, but right now you're making it online, relatively easier, all right? And there are payment plugins, logistics plugins, and every other thing else. So it just makes it easier, way better than it used to be 30 years ago.
So, according to reports, Africa already contains more than half of the world's mobile money transfer services that make secure online transactions a very short step, even those coming. And we still have the fact that the majority of the continent really remains unbanked. So how are we sort of pairing this together? We have Mauritius, Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria coming together and saying they're ready to take on the digital markets. But we still have a majority of the continent that's unbanked, not even in the digital marketplace. So is this really bringing transformation and change to the continent?
Yes, so Africa is a very interesting continent, which is why a part of it brings a lot of optimism and a part of it brings a lot of pain and deep questions. But it's very interesting in its entirety, and that's because it's also a highly resilient, all right, and self-reliant market. You have a high, growing digital onboarding, online payments, and all that, faced with really bad digital infrastructure. A huge chunk of your populace who are underbanked and even underserved as well. Those are very mixed, interesting realities. However, we're saying that on the positive side, that growth has happened because, number one, you have a rising digital savvy market, a rising technologically exposed market, a rising educated, all right, financially literate relatively, as well as middle class, all right, who are seeking more convenience and aspirational engagement when it comes to buying and selling and transactions. So digital becomes the go-to. But that also is faced with a very huge on the banked and the served market. Now, the reason why we have these mixed realities is because we have self-evolved into these technological realities, but we have not really evolved structurally and institutionally as a nation and as a continent. So you still have the underbanked and the underserved because we've not done a lot of strategic work in terms of financial systems development and digital literacy to reach the last mile. But because the average African is very, how will I put it, inquisitive, all right, is very aspirational, they themselves will jump into the next technological or Western drive when it comes to digital engagement. So you have those mixed realities. It's a plus as well as a minus. But on the larger scale of things, all right, the government or regulatory institutions in this climate has to do more around enabling, all right, institutional enabling and bringing all the factors together to ensure that you have a critical chunk of Africans jumping into the technological drive or digital banking or digital engagement drive globally, all right, than allowing that happen based on circumstance or accidentally. What we have is an accidental growth because at the end of the day, I mean, just 40% internet penetration in this part of the world, and that's relatively very low. When you look at it as well with about 45% urbanization rate. But then again, on the average 3% population growth rate, that's a lot of numbers and potential right there for us to turn tables around.
And I like the fact that you said it's a lot of potential right there for us to turn things around, but we've already seen the successes that are happening on the continent. We, of course, heard the numbers that came about with the Flutterwave valuation that came recently. So we know that Africa has the potential to have many, many, many unicorns that feed into the needs of this underbanked and underserved category. But in terms of the successes, when it does come to the digital markets, what are the successes you've seen on the continent in recent times that sort of lend themselves to this belief that further down the line, there's more coming?
Yeah, all right. So one of the major reasons why we see South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, I mean, mind you, a few months ago, we had a session here on the...
Okay, I think that's a technology thing there, a glitch happening there. But conversations on, as we've seen regulators from Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Mauritius, and Egypt coming together to put their focus on the digital markets. And in conversations we've had with Gospel in the past, he's not exactly one of those who's in support of too much regulation. But you have heard him say today that he believes that these regulators must create an enabling environment. There are those who are concerned with the fact that regulation might end up stifling these growing markets. But I do believe I have Gospel back with me. And Gospel, you were just making mention of some of the conversations we've had in the past regarding how some of these things have come about. Let's pick it up from there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, the same South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco you find as relatively top three when you think about this whole digital market engagement are the same top three destinations by the attractive investment destinations in Africa. So it means that those three countries are doing something right. But to answer the question now, we've seen a sincere, I would like to use the word sincere, or a drive in financial payments, all right, financial services onboarding, as well as digital and social media engagements, headlined from those three countries as well. So that speaks a lot to the potential, as well as that middle class traction to do things in a more safer, convenient / effective way than having to embrace traditional means of engaging digital transactions. And Kenya has been on the headline with M-Pesa and a lot of these interesting conversations, even before Nigeria picked up in a sense. So that, plus the fact that you have a growing middle class, plus the fact that you have a very huge population promise of currently at 1.3 billion plus, all right, which will get to about 2.5 billion in 2050. That's to tell you that there's a huge potential. However, the question and conversation has been that Africa, I mean, just similar to what is currently happening in Nigeria, has positioned a lot of innovative policies to become reactive than proactive. All right. So first off is you have not done the major work in organizing the market enough for institutional embodying, all right, or for scaling in terms of intentional, rigorous work now. But out of that self-reliant or resilient growth, all right, that's happened in spite of government now, not because of government. You're seeing government and other regulatory institutions seeking to regulate those spaces or manage the challenges as well. All right, you can't manage something you don't understand, or you can't regulate something you have not been intentionally involved in the enabling of that growth in the first place. I don't know if you get the point. So these are deep conversations that we need to have. We need to work backwards to organize first before we can effectively regulate. So we can't do the first things last or do the last things first, and we expect a miracle. Every growth we've seen right now has happened because we're in a highly resilient, all right, and aspirational market. And that would also inform how digital products, digital onboarding is being done by the people, but not necessarily because there is some form of structural and institutional drive to scale this promise in a sense.
And I want to pick up from that when we come back from the break, because there are numbers here that, of course, support this positive expectation of how the digital markets will work for the continent. But there are concerns. We've had the conversations on the regulators themselves, how much they truly understand of the trajectory of where some of this could take the continent. So let's pick up the conversation from their gospel. Of course, we're looking at the fact that 5 African countries have gotten together now to create a regulatory body for the digital market on the African continent. They've extended an invitation to others to join them, but there are still concerns about the potential that regulation has to stifle what has till now been a market that has been driven by innovation and really has not been touched by governments across the continent. We'll pick up this piece of the conversation after this. And still with me on today's Business Edge is Gospel Obele, Chief Economist for Streetonomics, as we look at African countries coming together to launch a digital market regulator. Now, in a statement that was released after the meeting, the body said that digital markets are transforming global economies rapidly by disrupting traditional markets and presenting enormous challenges for competition law enforcement. So before we get to some of the challenges around this competition law, let's get back to this regulatory issue. Do you have concerns when we're hearing that countries like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Mauritius, they're coming together to create a regulatory body? Do we really have the best, I guess we'd say, track record when it comes to regulating particularly innovative of different spaces? Do we have enough understanding to do this without stifling the creativity and innovation that has brought this industry this far?
Awesome. Thank you, Tolu. So yeah, it's on the first off, pretty impressive to see that African nations are coming together to collaborate on a regional conversation. So they've been one of the reasons why a lot of agreements and regional initiatives haven't scaled is a question of effective collaborations among governments or regulatory agencies. So it's quite impressive, and it's important for me to state that. But going forward, there are concerns around, it's literally what you see in Nigeria being amplified on the global stage. It's largely an African conversation because of the ideology and the culture around how we do things, all right? Because we're not so much of a research or innovation-driven economy, that also speaks to the fact that we are not really the people who are involved in the kickstart. All right, in the kickstart stage of a particular innovative drive or initiative in a sense. So, but as when this whole digital thing kicked off, right, we've seen a lot of disregard and a lot of times loss of interest from strong stakeholders in both the Nigerian and the African economy. But however, because the whole thing has skyrocketed, all right, and we've seen the impact on GDP numbers, and there's been some form of resilient growth into Western borders or the European region, then you see some form of interest in seeking to regulate. My fear is that there's likelihood of some form of stifling because you cannot effectively or correctly is the word now, you cannot correctly regulate a process or an institution or an innovation that you're not a part of from the start or you did not initiate from the start. So that's a very big question. How do you regulate what you don't understand? Same with the crypto question, same with the Bureau de Change question in the Nigerian context. It's largely a cultural ideology than a regulatory question. We are not a people who are driven to innovative engagement from the start. We like to relate or engage with innovation at the middle or towards the end. And that positions us to be very reactive, and we're much more prone or open to institutional mistakes, which will come back to hurt or slow down the pace of digital onboarding and scaling for the African economy across all economic agencies. So we talk about households, governments, and businesses. So there's a huge potential of a stifling than an enabling of that process. You can only enable what you understand.
All right, so let's talk about the challenges now. So they've noted, of course, that this transformation and this disruption is not happening just on the continent, it's happening around the world. But particularly for the African continent, what are the challenges we're seeing come about as we see more of an emergence of digital markets across the continent?
Yeah, so one of the headline challenges we're going to be seeing is the fact that because there was no organization from start, or there was no intentionality from start, one major challenge we'll find is the fact that leakages will evolve. All right, leakages in terms of transactions, leakages in terms of receipts of engagements, leakages in terms of how digital startups across different markets are synchronizing solutions to scale. All right, leakages in terms of communication and onboarding. So, for instance, fintechs in Nigeria, fintechs in Nigeria are doing a whole lot by themselves to reach the last mile when they can do more in partnership with commercial banks and central banks. But what you have is the body language and policy language from the central banks looks more monopolistic, all right, or self-driven than collaborative in nature. So all of those institutional dynamics are breeding different contexts of leakages. And when you have different contexts of leakages, that evolves into what you call some form of deepening of market disorganization, or some form of informality in the market, or unorganized market in a sense. All right. So currently the markets are unorganized, but that would further deepen when the leakages begin to evolve some more. All right. So those are the high level institutional conversations that needs to happen. All right. It's not too late to engage a system wide research or innovative research to understand, how these things can be effectively put together. Also, you want to talk about laws, all right? Laws around digital. For example, look at the cryptocurrency, look at the digital currencies market that are fastly evolving in the African market. Now, whether you like it or not, or whether your country has rolled out when I say your country now, any African country now has rolled out its own digital currency, young people are jumping in the cryptocurrency market, doing as high as $3 billion in peer-to-peer exchange almost on a week-on-week basis. All right, that's to tell you that these populates or markets are not waiting for the regulators. So those are big questions that are evolving in terms of challenges and institutional laws required to organize these digital currency markets, payment markets, all right, solutions and all that to social problems and all. So it creates a lot of questions, and that readiness becomes how will I put it now, to the Western world, all right, can be a metric, to assess when it comes to market entry, partnerships, or collaboration. That means how ready are you as a market, all right? And that's a big conversation here.
All right, so we can talk about the challenges and the concerns we have in terms of regulation, but I would like to end on a optimistic and positive note in terms of the potential and the opportunities for the digital markets on the continent. So, Gospel, what do you see are the opportunities that Africa has to take advantage of? We have the technological advancement that's helping us to leapfrog. We're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, possibly outside of the continent, but we're starting to see the traces and the effects of that even here on the continent. So what opportunities does the continent have to take advantage of when it comes to the digital market?
All right, very interesting question. The fact that Africans are already jumping on board, whether the government is ready or not, shows to you more than anywhere in the world that if we could create a lot of enablers, then we will see maybe that may just be the touch point for an economic or regional economic miracle in the sense of things, all right? But I realize that to transform this effectively, we'll need some form of collaboration across all institutional stakeholders, all right? The private sector has a huge role to play, all right? How is the private sector, rather, all right, evolving in itself in terms of digital enablement, digital transformation, and all that, all right? And how are we cross-enabling? So meaning that how is government working in terms of digital engagement with the private sector, and how are they creating solutions for, let's say, this small and medium enterprises now in this sense, all right? Within that chain of engagement comes a huge promise for exports, all right, and growing competitiveness, when you think about your nation or your continent in view of other continents in the world. So with digital engagements, we can empower more SMEs to compete competitively, but they cannot compete competitively when they cannot access finance, when they cannot they don't have access to market solutions, when documentations are a big problem and all that. Take, for instance, what one-stop shop, what digital one-stop shop can we create as a continent or as a nation that can help SMEs process all their export papers or engage their quality control solutions so that they can export more? All right. Once that can be fixed, all right, you can realize that SMEs will be able to get financing and will be able to do more. But you can't do that effectively if there is no form of institutional collaboration among government, the private sector, and the SMEs themselves. So even those who will be driving the engine of engagement have to be ready and willing. So there's a big question around enablement, all right? And that, I think, is the first place we need to get it right. Part of enablement is also the right infrastructure, the right education to position your own people, all right, to produce products and services within the confines of your laws, all right, and then engaging that in the context of the fourth industrial revolution across board and across the continents globally. But it holds a huge promise because of the population, because of the evolving entrepreneurial landscape and the digital onboarding, as it were, that currently exists. So there's a huge promise right there.
And we hope that promise can become more than potential and it becomes actualized. Gospel, thank you as always for joining me. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. As he said, the potential is there. A population of 1.3 billion Africans and more, the youngest population on the continent, innovation, technology, and opportunity to leapfrog into where we should be. And of course, the digital markets could be right at the center of that. Will others join this regulatory train? And what will the regulation look like in the future? As this story develops, we will, of course, have the updates for you. You're watching Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. And we get straight into a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. We start in the southern part of the continent where Sasol, the South African chemicals and fuel producer, has reported that core profit for the 6 months ended December 31st has tripled, boosted by a surge in crude oil and chemical prices. Its core headline earnings per share rose to 22.52 Rand from 7.86 Rand posted in the same period a year earlier. The Saudi Energy Minister Abdulaziz bin Salman Al Saud has said that focusing only on renewable power sources is a mistake and that the world may not be able to produce all the energy needed for economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. He added that a lack of investments had caused energy prices to rise, but that Saudi Arabia's government is continuing to invest in production capacity. Ethiopia has started power generation from the largest dam on the continent, indicating an intent to provide electricity to the unserved 60% of its population. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam remains a controversial construction figure that has had the countries involved seeking international mediation. And finally, the digital micro work project in Kenya's Kibera is connecting young people who are at risk of hunger to an online micro work platform, allowing them to earn income from machine learning jobs using cryptocurrency and e-wallets. For the project, the World Food Program has partnered with machine learning company Corsali and blockchain technology firm Celio. And that's it on this Monday edition of Business Edge. Thank you for joining us. Follow us on WhatsApp. Follow us, of course, on social media. Let us know what you think of the show and questions you may have about the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, download our mobile app, and take us with you wherever you go. I'm Tolulokwe Adela Rubalogun. Don't forget, news comes your way at the top of the 12 o'clock hour, West African time. See you later.